Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Ali Ingersoll. Summer is here and we are feeling the heat already. Local officials are looking to minimize the threat of that heat to our community. WRAL's climate change reporter, Liz McLaughlin, joins me today to talk about this. Hey, Liz, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what are some of these trends looking like? Raleigh feels hotter. Is Raleigh hotter?
It sure is. Raleigh summers are about 5 degrees now, hotter than they were in the 1970s, and there's no sign of slowing down. You might already be tired of hearing it. You know, it's the hottest summer or it's the hottest year on record again and again. And NOAA's latest projections give this year a really high chance of beating the 2023 record. So just prepare for a scorcher.
Yeah, last year I remember it was super hot, so good information to know that it's likely that it'll be hotter again this year. How many days on average do we have that are at or above 90 degrees? I feel like that's a mark that we look at quite often.
Yeah, aka when I'm miserable. But it's about a month and a half right now on average, like 43 days, which is already too many in my opinion. But global climate models really show dramatic warming, even if we can reduce emissions. So if we can reduce or stabilize global emissions, Raleigh's projected to have about 92 days above 90 degrees by 2080. So, you know, more than 3 months. But if we continue to increase emissions, kind of on the path we are on now, there could be 124 days above 90 degrees. That's a third of the year. So if you look at that across the U.S. or the globe, I mean, we're talking about warming that would make many parts of the country, of the world, unlivable.
Wow, that's a lot of time above that threshold here. So really significant. How are they starting to, I guess, show that there are more dangerous days? What is the National Weather Service and CDC? What are they doing?
You've probably seen that color-coded scale for extreme heat, you know, yellow, orange, red days. Well, red is no longer the hottest. So extreme heat is just so extreme that we need another color. So magenta or purple is what you'll see now for those like highest risk days. And that indicates a long duration of extreme heat with little to no overnight relief. And that's another troubling trend we're seeing for the ecosystem in terms of human-caused climate change. Nights are getting hotter across all seasons, and that includes here in Raleigh.
Yeah, I feel like as someone who runs early in the morning, 7 o'clock is usually like the time that I'm out there. And I feel like it used to be like a nice little break. And now it just isn't. It is in that time of year where 7 a.m. is still really, really muggy out there. And there's just like not that much of a break.
Yeah, I feel that too, because I have a pug who really needs to walk when it's not so hot outside, and it's just been muggier. You might need to take like a 4 a.m. run or something.
Don't tempt me with these. So what are some of the dangers of these extremely hot days?
You know, it's called the silent killer. There's more hot days really means more heat-related illnesses and deaths. About 2,300 people in the U.S. died last year from heat-related causes, but many experts actually think that number is way higher because of the way we record causes of death. But heat is the number one weather killer in the U.S. It causes more deaths than hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, all combined. So this is especially dangerous for vulnerable populations. You know, we're talking people with pre-existing conditions, the elderly, children, and even low-income residents who may not have access to air conditioning.
I think that's so interesting because when we talk about hurricanes, here in North Carolina, we really warn a lot of people, but there is something that is going on every single day in this state for weeks. You said 43 days. That is a massive threat to people, which I just think maybe they're not aware of.
And especially people who are working outside. And we're seeing some push now to add more protections to people who are really exposed to that heat more than others.
So how can we as individuals help reduce the risk?
You know, interestingly, things like solar panels that have other environmental benefits also reflect the heat from your roof and minimize your energy costs. So can planting trees. So kind of, if you're a homeowner, making your home shadier, having a more reflective roof can really kind of cut down on the heat that it's absorbing. Also individually, spending time in cool places or in the shade during the hottest part of the day, hydrating, so important. But vulnerable populations really need to be especially careful. And that might include like helping out or checking on those people if it's, say, your family member or someone at your church or a neighbor that might need help, or maybe their, AC went out. and monitoring those forecasts, just preparing if it's going to be especially brutal. And as we see more and more days that are in that category and sooner, right? We're not even technically into summer yet. And we've had really hot days. I've been blasting my AC for months. From a community perspective, there's also lots that can be done, from urban planning to grants, for mitigation measures to kind of help protect people.
And after the break, we'll talk more about what city leaders in Raleigh are doing to minimize those risks. Welcome back. There is a lot of data related to this, which is my favorite way to look at these stories, and yours too. So talk about the data that's here in Raleigh. It's very localized. How exactly was it gathered?
Now, you've reported on this. I have too for a couple of years. The city received this grant in 2021 to map out urban heat islands in the city. And those are areas with lots of paved surfaces, and they can act like heat magnets. And it can be 20 degrees hotter from one block to another. And you might feel this as you're walking downtown, or just imagine if you're in a paved parking lot on a 95-degree day, how that might feel different than, being under a tree at the park. But that, equates to more dangerous situations too. So now Raleigh has used that as a blueprint, and you can go online and see these urban heat islands, see, where your home is in that. But Raleigh's used that and is now utilizing geographic information system technology, so GIS technology from a company called Esri. And that company is also working with other cities in the U.S., even the White House for their extreme heat program, heat.gov. And then they're putting all of that in models that are using generative AI to play out what the climate will be like, say, a year from now, 2 years from now, and then what those heat islands and microclimates will be like. So really looking at, how development and climate change interact.
How does the city's layout and planning, as well as infrastructure, play a role in this? You kind of hinted at it, but I think it's so interesting when we drive around and the skyscraper here the skyline here has changed so much. So I guess, does that play a part in it? Does it block shade, wind, that kind of stuff?
Exactly. And so this is important because basically it's helping the city make better decisions. Might seem obvious, paved areas are going to be hotter, shaded areas are going to be cooler, but there's a lot of nuances here. And so they can use this AI to say, okay, if we're going to put a building here, how will that affect how it blocks the wind, how it absorbs heat, how, this maybe, residential area that's right next to it, and how all of them are going to have to pay, even more to cool those buildings. So it's kind of looking at climate change, rising temperatures, things like dew point, wind direction, all of that play a role. And it really matters where the roads, trees, and buildings are. So using these models, they basically, put that proposed building in the digital twin and then see how it would affect an urban heat island, or what they call those microclimates. And they've already done it with the Civic Tower project, and they kind of put it in the model and saw how it would impact based on the proposal of the building, how it would affect Moore Square.
That's really interesting. I wasn't aware that this technology was really out there, right? So how did they come to use all of this technology?
So it's, this combination, first the heat mapping, these GIS systems, the AI models, and they partnered with this company called MITRE, who originally wanted to map out drone highways. They were trying to see basically wind patterns and things to potentially, they think that in the future there'll be these kind of like an air traffic control, for drones, and they're trying to get on the forefront of that. But in working with the city, they realized, wow, this is really detailed application and could really be beneficial for heat mapping. So they kind of switched gears, and they've been working with that company since then, and then using that to prioritize. The city only has a certain amount of resources and time for these mitigation measures. So this helps them decide where it'll be the most effective. And also utilizing, tree equity, like looking at often, these urban heat islands happen to be in places with some of the most vulnerable populations, or, is unfairly in, minority communities.
I really like that this came about and it was discovered one way, and they were like, wait, we can use this in a completely different way. I just think that's so interesting. So when exactly will the city start making efforts to make Raleigh cooler? What are we doing right now to play our part as not as individuals, but as a cohesive community?
So you probably already see, straight shade structures and things like splash pads. People can go and cool off. Kids can run around and play in the fountains. Tree planting, that urban tree equity I talked about. They have a really detailed system with every single tree in the city and how mature it is, basically, and its canopy. It's really wild, and they can even change, based on what the climate will be like. Maybe we need a more resilient tree in many parts of the city that'll have the most cooling effect. Another cool thing they're doing is cool pavement. It's like these reflective roadways. Basically, they can coat the top layer of some roads with titanium dioxide, and it makes it really reflective, makes the pavement last longer, and even absorb some pollution. So it's got all these benefits. It's kind of expensive, so they can only do it in certain areas, but they're using this technology to decide where to put them. And they had a pilot program, but this year, just in the budget, they have dedicated, more money. So you can see where those reflective roadways are going to pop up. And in the heat mapping, you'll see around the roads, it is a scorcher. It is red all around there. So that should help a bit.
Now, this isn't the first time that you've done a story about urban heat, as we discussed. Is there anything else interesting about this topic that you really want to share that maybe sticks with you throughout doing this continued reporting?
I think just from the climate change lens, it's kind of interesting, right? We're seeing, a month and a half of days here in Raleigh over 90 degrees. So what do you do during that time? You stay inside, you blast the AC. And what's causing, a lot of this climate change, it's, our energy system. So we have to rely more and more on, using these energy creating greenhouse gases to combat the very thing that it's causing. And it's just this sort of cyclical thing. Raleigh is taking steps to, reduce the greenhouse gases created in its energy generation. But for the next 10, 20 years, it's going to be, it's just interesting. It's just the more heat that we face, the more we are creating the gases that create the heat. So just this
an endless cycle we're in. Thanks, Liz, for your reporting on this, and thank you for joining me. And also, thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. If you listen to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app, you can also find it in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.